I'll call the meeting to order.
The meeting has been posted according to open meeting laws.
Roll call.
President Johnson.
Here.
Trustee Alexander.
Here.
Trustee Holm. Here. Trustee Nugent. Here. Trustee Renucci.
Here.
Trustee Smalley.
Here.
Trustee Wisniewski.
Here.
Thank you.
Apologies for my casual approach to the meeting. This evening, I have to keep my foot elevated, so that is why I'm going to try to find a way to do this.
Do you need a newspaper basket?
No, I'm good. I'm good. All right. So I am engaged. I may look like I'm very casual, but I am here. All right. I don't see anybody unless John wants to do citizen participation. Okay, I'm not going to read the whole thing, so we're going to close citizen participation. Move on to consent agenda. One motion and a second will approve all the following. Any item may be pulled from the list and voted on separately.
I will move to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second it.
I just have one question on the Skyview Terrace. Do we have any cross-connection concerns like we have in the past?
Not currently, so we do those every 10 years, so we're good for a few years yet.
All right. Any other questions on the motion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right. So we're going to do which number are we? Okay, yeah, we're going to do item 1 and then item 3 since Brian's here. So we'll do item 1, review of 2025 operations budget, capital improvement plan, and financial management plan with Ellers. So we have a presentation by Ellers, and we have a draft 2025 budget. Please keep in mind that we do not have a meeting on the 4th because of the election on the 5th. So we will be approving the budget at whatever my math is, the 18th?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for having us back here again. More or less, think of this as the current initial draft results and kind of finalized valuation that we got numbers from the Department of Revenue last week, so we're able to have full confidence in kind of tax rate and tax bill impact as a result. So we just wanted to provide the board some updates as it relates to where the draft budget is and what the impacts are. So what you're seeing in the general fund summary that we have up on screen is last time's, which was about a month ago or so, presentation, and then any changes that have been made by category for revenues and expenditures. Given that this is pretty minimal when you just look at the bottom line revenues and expenditures, in total about 80 grand here, there's nothing that we really want to talk through just to show you what that looks like. So if you had line item concerns there, we direct kind of those questions to staff there. But this is the difference in what we presented last time to now.
Just real quick, so it looks like the positive change is the intergovernmental revenues went up, so I'm assuming that means more state aid, which allowed us to, doesn't account for all, but mostly do that reduction for what we thought the 2025 property tax number from 1.858 to 1.814. Is
Correct.
that roughly the story?
Yeah, personal property aid. Yep.
Yeah, it was also an increase in shared revenue and general transportation aids. went
Yeah,
up too.
those transportation aids went up too. Yep. So we just kind of wanted to show the old here and what we had as it relates to that breakdown of the total levy. And remember that your levy not only pays for your general fund operations, but goes into capital projects, various special revenue funds, library, CDA, and then the airport fund and debt service fund. So, but that's kind of what we presented last time. And then just to update that, what we're looking at now for a total levy is 2.77 million and change. And that's a total decrease of 23,408. So to compare the two slides. And then we always take this initial draft information for whatever community that we're serving and then want to run that through a levy limit check. So as you may know, you're governed by levy limits. Primarily, as you may recall from our last meeting, that's a function of net new construction gets added in to your allowable levy. And then the other big change every year is what you claim for debt service, because those are exempt of levy limits on an annual basis. So you can claim whatever you need as it relates to that debt adjustment. So what you're seeing here is kind of that same levy need on the top half of the chart for budget year 2025, or the right most column at 2.77 million and change. And then we just plug that into the levy limit worksheet to kind of say, are you able to get there? So we don't have any concerns. This was kind of a minor change. You meet the allowable levy limit with, no additional abated debt claim or any unique circumstances going on there. This is probably the most important slide to be presented. Now we have the actual assessed valuation numbers from the state. So that is the assessed value TID-in row that's right under your levy need column. What you're looking at there, if you kind of compare year over year, just under 10 million in added value. And then you actually taxed, when you get your tax bill as a property owner in the village, you would take your tax rate times your own value, but that tax rate is derived off of an assessed value TID out. So what you're seeing there in the TID EV and the assessment ratio is us removing that TID value on an assessed basis to get your actual assessed value on a TID out basis. So that actually went down, and that's not uncommon, basically to say the TID is growing faster than the TID out. That is happening in most communities that you'll see in the state of Wisconsin. So there, that assessed value TID out row, kind of identifies for 2025 as 431 million, almost 432 million. And therefore, based off that levy need number of 2.77 million, that's a tax rate of $6.42. There was no revaluation this year. Therefore, the sample property tax value, or property value, that we're using remains the same at $250,000 for that sample property. Then the tax bill goes up to $1,604.06, or an $88 change. And then we provide all the fun, percentage changes year over year, just for context and purpose there. So. Again, kind of a $88 change to that sample tax bill as a result of this initial draft budget for 2025.
So according to what you're putting in here, then, if this were a tax bill and your house was worth $250,000, you'd be paying $56 more, $58 more?
$88.32 more from last year to this year. So it's the line that says sample property tax bill delta with.
Right, I'm just looking at 2631 versus 8832, so I subtracted one from the other, and that would give me how much increase there was.
No, that's the $26 is an increase from the prior year. So from 22 tax bill for 23 budget. So the change from last year's bill to this year's bill is $88.32. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, you want to run from it.
So then again, just note, we go beyond the 25 budget. The purpose of the FMP is to start doing, some financial stress tests, look at, what new services or initiatives might look like, and the whole gamut here. So we talk about that in our first presentation, so I'm really not going to talk through that as to why we do it again. So if you don't mind going to the next slide. And then if you're curious as to some of the assumptions in the model, we would just be linearly changing each expense by categorizing it, looking at your historical changes over time in each of these categorical expenditures, and then applying that for the 26 budget, 27 budget, and so forth for the next 5 years as a way to kind of say, if you continue on this trend, and we kind of stress you against net new construction, which I'll talk about in a second here, what does that look like? So this isn't us, putting this down and saying walk away and feel comfortable and knowing what the 26, 27 budgets, like everything's going to land on the penny. It's more to understand how do we fit the square peg of expenditures, inflationary pressures, et cetera, into the round hole of levy limits and net new construction. Do we have things at play that we can be successful in funding, a full budget based off of these assumptions? So then to look at it, this chart again repeats that levy need calculation in the top half, and we're just splitting up the levy need, by the general fund, the other funds that I went through earlier. We start with the 25 budget. Those are kind of the knowns, and then we take our linear assumptions, right, for the 26 budget and beyond. If you were to add in any new hires or things like that, that would be an opportunity too, where we could plug information like that in as well. And then what we kind of solve for the levy check is to say, we're going to assume your future net new construction of 0.85%, which is a discounted average of your historical performance. So it is a financial stress test in that manner to say, we're not going to assume you do the best you've always, the good news for net new construction. Let's assume bad news for net new construction and move that forward. And then we just adjust the debt limit to your actual debt need. And then anytime that there's a negative shown for the allowable levy, basically that's saying under these assumptions, our expenditures have caught up to net new construction in our base levy allowable amount, or what we call pre-adjustment allowable amount. So this is kind of setting up the path for, what kind of tough decisions would we have during a budget cycle if all of these things were to come to fruition. For most communities, I would say you obviously want at least a 1-year runway, right, to at least think about how are we going to do this if we don't get net new construction. Having a 2-year runway, right, provides a very long time to think about navigating those elements, and you could certainly lengthen your opportunity to outpace this net new construction assumption. So when we look at this and think about prior year's presentations that we've given this board, this is about in line with what we've typically seen. All this is to say is you've been outperforming that net new construction low assumption, or outperforming this financial stress test. So due to a lot of the work that the board and staff do in order to keep the community growing, as well as keep expenditures low enough that you're not running yourself into tough financial decisions. So that's all to say, if you were, anytime you do see a negative number, and let's say we run into even worse net new construction scenario, do we have a lever we can pull immediately? That answer is yes. When we look at the additional abated debt, or the bottom line, that's basically an allowable claim for levy limits that, if needed, you could use to meet your levy limit, deficit. The issue there is we don't want to continually have to use that because the debt service eventually goes away. So we don't want to make, hey, we got an extra 600 grand, why don't we hire 3 people? Well, that debt service eventually goes away, right? So your ability to claim that year over year would go away. But it can be a lever you pull for a year or two if needed, just to kind of meet your levy limit or allowable levy limit, excuse me. So. And then,
I just had a quick question.
yeah, go ahead.
Help me understand. So on the allowable levy, pre-adjusted allowable levy, the 2025 and 2026 numbers are the same, and the same with the 27 and 28? You see that, the 2.453, 2.453, why are those the same?
Yeah, that should be going up by the 0.851. So there's probably just something not calculating there correctly. So at the end of the day, right, you'd have a higher amount in both of those years.
So does that affect the negative numbers then?
Only
last
slightly, right? If you think about 1% on 2.4 million, not exactly taking care of probably the last 2 years there of the negative 324 and 384, but could certainly help the 27 levy year for 28 budget.
The next two are the same also.
Yeah, he pointed that out. So then on this slide, what we're doing is, again, we're repeating kind of the levy need and then showing what that impact is on the tax bill, tax rate in the future. Again, this is baked with assumptions as it relates to your valuations. So we are taking, again, just kind of a discounted historical average and baking that in. The other element that we're doing is incorporating the revaluation for the 1/1/25 value year, which would impact 2026 budget. If you remember our presentation from about a month ago, we kind of analyze, it should be understood that while you increase your assessed value by going through the revaluation process because you're bringing up all of the assessments to their current fair market value. So you do increase the tax base, which lowers the tax rate. If properties are then getting reassessed, that doesn't automatically equate to a tax bill decrease. So that's absent the fact of the budgetary decisions, right, that you make to increase the levy or, move the levy, whichever way you do. So I didn't put a whole nother slide about it, but one thing that we did calculate is to say, what if you levied the exact same amount in the 26 budget year as you plan to right now under the initial draft budget for 25, or that 2.77 million and change, and plug in against this projected assessed value. The tax rate drops, obviously, because we're levying less. We're levying about 130 grand less. But the tax bill actually does still increase by about $10. So this is all to say it's going to be a matter of figuring out when we get the actual values where that all kind of lands. What we're just noticing statewide when a community goes through a reval is definitely the residential class is carrying the weight of your total valuations as it relates to fair market value. There's housing prices have skyrocketed, slowed down a little bit, but certainly gone up, way faster than, commercial properties or office space and things like that. So again, just kind of a reminder that there's an understanding that the tax rate does go down, but that doesn't always immediately equate to a tax bill decrease. Here, kind of on average, we're generally in line with about a 5% adjustment to the tax bill, as you can see through the tax bill delta percentage-wise. So, your assumptions on increased expenditures basically result in about a 5% tax bill increase in general, and there's a little bit extra bump because of the reval and the assumed adjustment in the sample property value. And again, that's taking a residential property. And then this is just kind of breaking down that tax rate. As I know this has been asked about in last year's presentation, kind of like what goes into, a tax rate, how many dollars from each category. So that's all that this slide is really doing. I would say, obviously, as you're adding new debt, that of course adds to additional tax rate for debt service. However, we're trying to structure that in against your existing debt. So we'll see some drops and then fill that in as projects come along, and we need to use debt to finance that. And then the other element is just an acknowledgement that if you do meet these net new construction pressures and we have to lower the capital projects levy, that would go down as well. However, the benefit of levying for capital projects, of course, is you don't have to issue as much debt. So there can be kind of a counterbalance as it relates there. I guess I did keep this in. I thought I took it out. But that's the $10 change that I was talking about for the 2026 budget as it relates to the impact of a reval, or if we freeze it, right, and don't change the levy at all, does the theory come true on tax bill increasing still? And again, that's a function of the assumed revaluation for the residential class. Then expenditure restraint. What a lovely restriction to not only limit revenues, but limit expenditures and hold dollars over municipalities. So what this is basically the state asking municipalities, if you limit expenditures, we can qualify you for additional shared revenues. However, the DOR said at one point that the village is not qualifying due to the '24 budget, but that has nothing to do with the change in expenditures. It actually has to do with a qualifying factor as it relates to your TID-out tax rate. And so it says under that theory that you will not qualify. However, I don't know if they came back and said they are qualifying.
Yeah, so we are getting it for 25, but now 26 we won't unless somehow our tax rate,
Yeah.
It's just fascinating to me that you limit your expenditures, but then your tax rate gets too low
Right.
when you're not
yeah.
qualified?
Yep. So. Right. So, at the end of the day, we acknowledge it is a small part of the budget. You can certainly operate without it. We, of course, have levy claim for additional levy dollars. That's not ideal, but it's just something that should be acknowledged if we, those state shared revenues go down. I think the reason that you're still getting it for 25 was one of the original arguments I made when we found out that they said you weren't qualifying, is they did actually freeze all of that for the 24 budget year for 25 payment. So that means that everybody who got it should get it again regardless of that qualifier. So it sounds like you're still getting it as a result of 24's budget, which they give you those revenues in 25. However, under what we normally understand the DOR's qualifying factors, we're kind of showing that based off the 25's budget and your TID-out EV, which we know now, you would still be under, and therefore without this automatic qualification, you would lose out on it. This does kind of beg the question, if you already have a non-qualifier year, that what some communities will do is, why don't we increase our floor, because it's a budget to budget action item. You have until May to do this, so I'm not making this to say you need to put this in your budget by November, I forget the date that you guys said, but your November meeting, because you file this in May, so you can technically do a budget amendment. What the mechanism is to increase this, again, it's a budget-to-budget calculation, not a budget-to-actual, is you put in a contingency line item and then a fund balance applied line item, and you're never spending these dollars. So a lot of communities will do that as a budget amendment later. They set their levy and everything so that there's no question that they're not spending these dollars. They kind of do it as a feature right before that May deadline to file the ERP worksheet. So this would be something that I think if the village is interested, we can kind of run through that analysis. But again, it's specifically important if you already know you're not qualifying, and you can kind of reset your floor for qualification. If the TID-out EV mill rate were to be $5, again, you can guarantee qualifications through this. So through this mechanism. So I had one community basically put 5 last year, knowing they were automatically qualifying, putting 5 years of new hires in, even though they said, we may not hire everybody within these 5 years, but they have a ERP runway that goes, way beyond 5 years. They can hire all those people if they want, but they probably won't do so if the levy impact is so great. But it's, again, a budget-to-budget mechanism that you can just keep your floor high enough on the financial qualifying factors. So,
How much extra in state aid are we talking?
forget what your 20. I should have.
I want to say it was like 12,000?
I know. Yeah, I was gonna say. I think you're under 20.
Yeah, it's not a lot of money.
Yeah.
We're not getting a new squad car.
I feel like that explanation cost me more than 12,000.
So the next 2 slides are just kind of reminders on fund balance. These are more takeaways if you kind of forget how fund balance is breaking down, or why we bring up fund balance. But you can advance 2 slides.
Okay, expenditure restraints was $12,316.01.
There you go. Yeah, it's a saver. Yeah. So then kind of looking at where the village has been, I think the biggest message here, understand the bars are just the different categories of your fund balance to show the full amount. And then the lines are the percentages, which I don't know why the percentages get cut off on the right-hand side. But essentially, GFOA target is kind of 2 months of reserves. Moody's is generally around 25% to 30%. And then where we're kind of looking at target for the village is generally around 35%. So this is all to say the village has done a really good job in terms of its budgetary performance year over year, allowing for a surplus to then apply some of the extra unassigned fund balance to projects, and things like that. So we do not have a concern as it relates to your current fund balance performance, and would just recommend, continuing the practice that you're doing. You have a good policy that kind of explains how you handle excess fund balance, but no concerns there. So then the utilities part of the FMP, this is kind of the first time that we're reviewing it for 2024 FMP with your group. So we want to simplify this. The tables that you'll see in the final report are about 20 deep for each utility, but it can be brought down to kind of 2 things when we think about how are we doing and where are we going. So the how we're doing with the water utility, this is a chart that answers the question, how much should our rate revenues be under 2 methodologies? And these are generally accepted methodologies from the American Water Works Association, so as to say, if we're looking at the cost of our system, one of them is called the cash basis. That's all of your cash expenditures for the utility, so your day-to-day expenses or O&M and pilot, and then debt service, and then cash-funded capital. A little bit nuanced there, but cash-funded capital, just think of annually, these utilities are buying smaller equipment items and, not financing that with debt or any other source of external revenue, but year-end surplus or built-up surplus from prior years from utility rates. And then the other element is we add your recommended debt coverage ratio to the cash-funded capital line item. So you add up all those cost buckets, subtract out your other revenues. That builds what's called a revenue requirement. You weigh that against your user rate revenue. Most of the red numbers you see are just more or less a function of, waiting for a PSC rate case to happen, or you just happen to spend a little more cash that year instead of issued debt. So those are less concerning because we went through the rate case process in 2023, and now we're basically back up to where we should be on a cash basis. The same kind of holds true then on what's called the utility basis, or the bottom half of this chart. It's just they changed the cost categories. So the important part here is this is actually what the PSC strictly follows in how they build rates, and same O&M, but instead of debt and cash-funded capital, they look at depreciation and a rate of return on your rate base. So depreciation, just an annual formula to say, hey, we're replacing the cost of this asset based off of its original install cost and dividing it by its service life. You add that up for all of your assets. That doesn't take into consideration those assets are probably going to cost more at the time you replace them, meaning more than the original install cost, and you may have interest expense on those assets if you finance them with debt. So the third cost bucket, this rate of return, is designed to build up for those elements. They just take the undepreciated value of the system, which they coin as net investment rate base, and apply their benchmark rate of return to say these are the annual dollars. So in 2020, that's about $200,000 for the utility. The one important thing to note, though, is the PSC sets this benchmark. You really can't control it. It goes all over the place all the time. And you just kind of want to keep tabs on this, because even though we just did a rate case, technically the PSC says you're behind on your rates, while we would disagree because you're producing cash. The utilities in a healthy financial position, if you ever needed an adjustment, you will be beholden to this. Unfortunately, the PSC is getting more robotic in how they consider rates. But one element here that I would just acknowledge is their rate of return spiked when we were in the middle of our rate case, so they actually set your rates to 6.8%. So even with the rate of return dropping to 6.2, technically behind, but only by a little as it relates to the PSC. So important things.
Sorry,
Yeah,
what's
go ahead.
PSC?
Public Service Commission, they
Okay.
regulate your water utility rates.
Okay.
So then to look at comparison, this is water bills only. We took Walworth and Waukesha County. Here, you land with your current rates, and that's with your 2024 adjustment in effect. You land right in the middle. If someone were to ask, like, where would you want to be within this? Everybody assumes you'd want to be the cheapest. However, one, you have different system makeups, right? You may have topography that has pumping expenses like nobody near you, or you may have radium in your water, whatever it might be. So there's no apples to apples. But if I think about a regulated utility, all I would say is when projects do come up and you are forced to go to the PSC, the larger magnitude adjustments are always the ones that are, yeah, we got it on the bottom half of this chart. We're doing awesome because we got cheap rates. And then a project comes along and the PSC says, well, you got a 34% increase, or in some cases, a 211% increase, which was not a fun one to do. So it's important to stay on top of your rates, keep up with the PSC math, but this is, about where I would want to be if I were, running a utility, is just kind of right in the middle, knowing that we have rates that are fairly charged, meaning we're covering our costs, we're not overcharging, but we're not undercharging either, and that should be acknowledged. So I think the utility's in a good position there.
Sorry, I ask a lot of dumb questions, but what's utility class? There's A, B, C.
Sure, yeah, no, it's a good question. D is anything under 1,000 customers. C is 1,000 to 4,000. AB is 4,000 and above. We keep it on there only to say, right, those utilities, depending on what they are, you see a bunch of the ABs that are really high right there. System requirements are likely higher due to the amount of customers that they have. But again, it can be a function of how they operate. Hence, Elkhorn is really high because I know they have a lot of radium to treat, and so their treatment process is double the costs of the statewide benchmark. So
And that number, is that connections or population?
connections.
Connections.
Yeah. So then the sewer utility, we don't have the PSC, so the utility basis is less important because you really are just throwing out a number as it relates to what you would say that benchmark rate of return should be. So we do tend to focus on the cash basis if we're just answering the question, how are rates performing? Now, the one element here, I'm not going to re-explain this chart, but remember there's kind of that cash-funded capital. You'll see the 25 one spike. That is intentional in terms of we are, the plan is to apply about $1 million from the sewer utility to that lift station project. The sewer utility does have a lot of cash on hand and can definitely handle it. This is in our model, and the sewer utility is still very, very healthy doing it. The other intent, too, would be if TID 5 moves forward, it would have the allowable project expense to reimburse the sewer utility if those revenues were available. So that's why you do see kind of the big negative in 2025, but note that's a unique outlier, and in truth, kind of why the PSC doesn't follow the cash basis. But because you wouldn't want to spike rates 54% for one project if you're paying in cash with it. So, but the point is, if you kind of remove that $1 million, right, you're about breaking even, just like we were showing for 24, if that makes sense. So. And then to kind of prove that, because I know that's a scary number to look at, we just wanted to show what the future cash flow for that sewer utility with the $1 million use was. And the benchmark is at the bottom of this page, the over-under of where we'd kind of recommend. You're still over our benchmark there, and we're not showing any debt being used for any projects in the near term. CIP here. So even with that, and then also a consideration of the big treatment plant loan dropping off in 27 to 28, you're going to have capacity to add debt. If an unknown project comes up, or, we decide not to do the water quality trading or whatever, if something else comes up with the treatment plant, you could funnel in new debt service and still be in a healthy position where you wouldn't potentially need to raise rates. Now, if that project's $5 million, please let me know, because that changes things, but it's just kind of like right now, all other things being equal, we can kind of let that debt drop off and not need to adjust rates, and then we'll kind of see where future capital takes us.
So we are doing facilities planning right now, and Applied Tech is hoping to bring that to the board by the end of the year. So that the 27 number dropping off will come into play
Yeah.
in that discussion.
And right, once we see those numbers, we can plug that into next year's analysis and kind of show what any projected debt would be for any of the capital improvements that the facilities plan produces. So no recommended adjustments for the utilities as it relates to the 25 budget, or really immediately beyond that factor. So with that, I can take any other questions.
Can we go to the first slide? I have something very specific. While we're doing that, I missed, what was our final net new construction?
I would have to.
That's okay. If you don't, that's
Yeah.
2-something%, okay. So while so public safety, is that just police or is that police, fire, and rescue?
Police, fire, and rescue.
Okay, because that's about half, that increase there is about half of the bottom line increase. Does that sound right? Okay, I just,
Yep.
when we talk about like, what are we spending?
Yep.
Like, oh, our costs are going up, we're spending more, like, it's the public safety. Like, I mean, half of that is the public safety, right? there. So, and that's a huge part of our labor cost too.
Yep.
That we're happy to pay. That's not a criticism, just.
Yeah.
But I just want people that, since we don't have anybody in the audience, if they're watching at home or watching a recording, you know, that's what's a big part. It's not all, but is a, you know, it's just shy of 50% as I was calculating here. Other questions, comments? I think too, this shows kind of what we talked about a few months ago about future capital challenges that we have and the need to continue to focus on growth. Hence, we'll talk in a few minutes about TID. Other comments or questions? Okay, so we've got a memo here from Eileen about her adjustments, and I guess this is our last chance to make any requested changes. Anything, I think most of what you talked about, Brian already covered. You got a couple of details here about health insurance and salaries. Not really a lot of changes from our last discussion, though. Any questions or comments for Eileen? Things you want to change?
Okay, then we'll get things set up for a public notice, public hearing scheduled for November 18th.
All right, we're going to skip number 2. We're going to go straight to number 3 on the agenda, and then we'll let Brian go. Number 3 is discussion and possible direction to staff regarding tax increment district TID 5 formation. So you see our summary of our discussion. Jeez, zooming. Our discussion of our October 7th meeting. There's fiscal considerations there with the conservative assumptions, possibly closing the TID early, and a map of the TID boundary. I would just point out, I was having a conversation with Brian and Eileen before the meeting started. The property owner of the property west of the School Street lift station is requesting to be included in the TID boundary as well. The property owner of the property west of the School Street lift station, that little triangle there, the property west of it, that individual is requesting to be added to the TID. And so I asked staff to take a look at that for possible change in how it is configured or developed. Any questions, comments, further direction to staff on TID 5? What was the date on the Joint Review Board? Sorry, my computer.
So the tentative schedule we have in place, the Joint Review Board meeting and Plan Commission meeting to consider the TID would be December 9th. The board could have their meeting on December 23rd. It has to be 14 days after that public hearing to consider formation. The TID is considered officially formed as of the date of approving that resolution. So we could either do the December 23rd or January 6th meeting. There are timing implications with doing January 6th because we have that property under contract. And if we do want that to be considered a TID expense, then we would want to consider having a meeting on the 23rd, but I don't know what everybody's schedule looks like.
23rd makes sense only because we stay within the year of this year yet.
It's not going to have much of an implication on the TID itself.
Yeah, it's more for the project expenditure, because right now, you're already a 1/1/25 TID, because you're past September 30th, so there's a different, calendar year, so it's going to take all the values as of 1/1/25, then any increment generated, so construction 25 and beyond would benefit the TID, so.
So if you go to the project list, oh, you got it up there. So this is our time to talk about adding projects, because once we form it, we'd have to amend it.
I had a question on the chart, a couple pages down, where it's, I think, year 13, 2036, 6.9 million for future development. Yeah. Yeah, you see 2036 where it says 6.930 million. And I think that's future development. How did we come up with that number? Like, how does that work? Yeah.
Yep. So, understanding that we're putting together a project plan that is supposed to be kind of an appropriation of funds, not a budget and hey, we have to spend it in this time. So there's the expense side. We're also developing assumptions on the front end to say, how are we going to pay for these? Generally, the thought practice there is to, outside of known developments, try to be as conservative as possible. So we do not include, I don't think, you can probably go down one more, Eileen. I was going to say, our economic appreciation is pretty minimal. I think it's 1% that we have in there. Your TIDs now generally see about 2 to 3%. So that's one thing. And then as it relates to kind of plugging for the unknowns, right, the other undeveloped properties or potential redeveloped properties, we do want to put that on like kind of the back end as much as we can. So this is not saying we know something's going to happen at the value of $6.9 million. It's more of a plug to say, based off of the undeveloped or potential redeveloped properties that are not discussed in the other development assumptions, what kind of value would need to be generated under all of these assumptions to get to the end goal of the project plan. And that would be, the closure year from the cash flow on the next page. I assume it's the next page. Sorry, I didn't see the memo.
So it's a miscellaneous assumed future development, not known what it could be,
Right.
to try to offset other costs, which then we will determine whether we want to engage in those costs or not, depending upon if something promising that would be in that 6.9
Right.
was showing.
Yeah.
So I say that for anybody who's watching this, that like, just because we list it here doesn't mean it's going to happen both on the revenue side, but if it's not going to happen on the revenue side, we're not going down that path on the expense side.
Right. The whole point is you're putting together, right, a 20-year, 27-year budget at the end of the day, but you're not actually saying, hey, this is everything that's going to happen. As I always kind of present in the annual joint review board meeting, the village should not execute projects in which it does not have the increment to pay for it. So in practice, what you're doing is, hey, did we hit these? If we didn't, we can't expend, past our means, so.
Under the Marathon tank removal demo, does that include a soft cost as well?
I don't think it did. I think it included, the soft costs have not been a lot. And I do believe that when Sigma gave me the numbers for the tank removal in the demo, they said they were high. So I think we have some flexibility in there.
Other questions? So do we want to aim for a meeting on the 23rd?
That'll take place in our other room.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear it.
So, yeah, so normally he's asking, so I guess, setting this question aside, do you want a meeting on the 23rd? Because that's when we would normally have that's our third Monday. Oh, it's a fourth Monday, I'm sorry, okay. So we don't have, then this would be the only business on that meeting.
We've been working at this project, and I think it would only make sense to get it over with and get it done.
So do you guys want to try to do that during the day and not in the evening?
Or virtual meeting?
Do it virtually? December 23rd. Because it's got to be so it's got to be 14 days after the Joint Review Board meeting.
And the Plan Commission holds the public hearing at the December 9th meeting, so this would not, so having it as a hybrid meeting, I don't think is concerning because your public hearing has already taken place.
Correct.
Or hybrid or virtual, or however you want to do it.
I say let's go with the hybrid meeting on the 23rd.
Okay, and we can discuss more in early December if schedules are a problem for people. But just pencil that in on your schedules that you're available. Okay, other than scheduling, do we have anything controversial about what we're looking at here? Okay. Try to read Forty's body language over there. I look really relaxed, don't I? Okay, so nothing else on TID. We can let Brian go? All right. Thank you. Have a good night. All right. Item 2, I think, will be quick. Consider state/municipal agreement, SMA, related to TAP grant award for planning of the East Troy to McQuanago multi-use recreational trail.
This is design only, correct?
It's actually not design, it's planning. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm planning for this, okay.
We applied for a design, and they asked us to come back and do a planning and then a design. So if we would like it, we should sign this agreement. So I needed a motion if you were so inclined.
Sure, I'll move to approve the SMA for the planning study related to the East Troy McQuadago multi-use recreational trail project.
I'll second it.
Any questions or discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right. Item 4, consider approval of hiring police officer. Chief?
We currently have one opening for full-time. Took applications, did interviews. This is who they recommended to me, the 2 officers and the deputy chief that did the interviews. I met with her. Obviously, she's currently a deputy with Walworth County, so I'm familiar with her along with everybody else that works here. Very high comments about her. Everybody is excited. She still has to do the psych test and a physical. The physical was delayed. ProHealth canceled her physical before she left to go on vacation, so she couldn't get that in. Her psychological exam is scheduled for this week, and then I think the physical is scheduled for next week sometime, along with the drug test. So I'm just asking for approval to hire Taryn as a full-time officer pending the successful completion of the psychological exam and physical and drug exam.
Questions for the chief?
How long has she been with the county?
I want to say 4 years.
I'll make a motion to approve the hire of Taryn Duckworth as a full-time police officer pending successful completion of her psychological, physical, and exams and drugs test.
I'll second.
Any questions or discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Good work, guys. Glad to get somebody in. And the fact that she spends a lot of her off time doing jujitsu, I see park and rec opportunities.
Well, and she's got 2 dogs, come on.
She work them out right here. Work-life balance, right? All right. Item 5, consider approval of garage door purchase for the wastewater treatment plant. Guess we should have some garage doors that are not from the early 80s. Unless, they still work, but I guess this one doesn't.
That's correct. It works maybe intermittently at best.
Is that why you guys had to get a new hood for the truck?
That's not why, but a couple years ago, Jason did tell me that at one point that door came down very close to him and was quite scary. So
That was actually the door we replaced, 2 years ago or last year or whatever.
it was that one?
door.
Well, let's replace this one before that one comes down.
Oh, I didn't realize that we were qualifying these things, so.
And just for clarification, the reason this is in front of you is because we're looking to redirect funds, so.
It looks straightforward on the surplus aspect, so, yeah, makes sense. You get a motion?
Sure, I'll move that we use surplus funds left in the capital improvement plan from the sensor replacement project to replace the west garage door at the wastewater treatment plant and approve Scotty P. Garage Doors proposal for same.
I'll second it.
Any questions or discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Ordinances and resolutions. Ordinance 2024-16, recommendation from Plan Commission to amend the village's zoning regulations, Chapter 510, regarding planned developments. We discussed this a couple of meetings ago, took it back to the Plan Commission because we said this verbiage didn't make sense. The Plan Commission was always intended to be the final say, not the village board. And the Plan Commission agreed, shocking. So we need to change the ordinance.
Then I'll move to approve ordinance 2024-16.
Well, then I'll second it.
Questions or discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. On to staff reports. September financial reports. We have September financial, airport, and a variance report. Questions for Eileen? What is with this? All right, if no questions on those, item 2, Fire Chief September report. Questions for Jason since he's here?
I just had a question. What do we do with the old piece of equipment? one with
The
badge.
truck?
Transmission, yeah.
We have it if you want it.
His
I
name,
wasn't asking.
his name is not Alex.
You can absolutely have it. The only thing is, you have to get GenCom out there to swap out the radios, because we're having a lot of trouble with that, but nope. Other than that, we're waiting for the radio to get swapped so we can decide what we're doing with it. Unfortunately, it's still on insurance, because it's still on the books until then. So hopefully we'll get rid of it, or get that swapped out relatively soon here.
Any other questions? All right, item 3, Public Works Director, third quarter report. Questions for Jason? Any follow-up on School Street that we need to do?
Not at this point. We did issue the check to Ms. Keys, and last time I had talked to her, she still did not receive the insurance check, so I asked her to let me know when she received that. So,
And any other questions or concerns have come in on special assessments?
not that I've fielded. I don't know if you guys have anything that has come in.
We have received some payment.
How close are we on, do you think, on an agreement with the town on the compost site?
So I actually talked with both DPWs at both towns today. The town of East Troy had some suggested edits that they sent back that I will send over to Attorney Pruitt for review. And the town of Troy, I talked to that DPW today, and it sounded like their attorney had not yet reviewed the agreement, so he was going to see where that was at and get back with me.
Any other questions for Jason? I already asked. Okay, you already asked him, all right. I applaud you on the third quarter, you know, we're still in October, so it's a good job.
Thank you, appreciate that.
All right, we'll move on to airport manager quarterly report. Since Doug's not here, any questions for Jason?
So Doug had planned to attend. He sent me a text late that he was unable to make it tonight. So if there's anything, I'll try to field it, and if not, we can get an answer from him.
Just my only question was the, are we progressing along with the hangar lease that we talked about with the gentleman who wants to do the repair and maintenance?
Yes. So we have had draft comments, and those were back to Tim, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We shared all of our comments with Tim, so
Yep.
we're waiting for him to.
So we'll get that back from Tim Pruitt, and then we will share that with the tenant.
I have one question, Jason. As far as I know they were having a problem with the pump, the fuel pump out there for the Jet A. Excuse me. But my question is, does Titan do the maintenance on the pumps?
So we do some of the maintenance, and Titan doesn't really do maintenance. They do inspections for us, but they don't do any work. Either we do it, or we have a contractor that we work with, Petroleum Equipment, to do maintenance.
But the pumps belong to Titan?
No, the pumps belong to the Village of East Troy.
Okay.
We're about a year in with Titan, right?
Yeah, I would say we're probably a little bit over that.
Are we happy with them and the data that we're getting?
I think things have been working really well. I mean, we recently had, we had to lean on them for some information, and I think it was very helpful. I think things are going well. I mean, we're competitive on our pricing. We have a nationally known brand of fuel in our tanks, so I think that's going very well.
And then you and I can take this up separately, but do I need to call the BOA?
I emailed today asking for a meeting, so if I don't get a response on that, I will let you know.
Were we going to get more reports with regard to fuel sales, like charting or something like that, so we could see trends, or?
Sure, I'll touch base with Doug on that. I thought that was actually going to be part of his quarterly report, but obviously it's not in this one. So I will talk with him about that and make sure we get that to you guys more timely.
Yeah, I just think the reason why I asked for we've been at about a year, so we can start getting month over, comparison, so October of last year versus October of this year, because it was real hard to compare to before.
Right, and we can easily get that data now. So yes, we can make that happen.
I can work with Doug on that.
And I guess, is the plan from the fuel standpoint and those pieces and the leases for you to train Danette, how, or is that going to shift, some of that going to shift to Doug?
No, I'll be working with Danette. She starts on the 30th.
The ordinance update as well is getting close. I sent that back to Attorney Pruitt today for some updating post-BOA comments. So as soon as I get that back, I'll have it over to Airport Advisory for one more look, and then we should be able to adopt that by the end of the year.
So on point 3 here, it says there was a state audit. What were the couple things that they found?
That one I don't know. I'd have to get you an answer on that one. I know we had to purchase a recirculating pipe had to be replaced in one of the tanks. And I don't know what the other item was, but I can certainly get you some more information on that. All those have been complied with, so.
I just say, and for Doug to know, the volume of our questions are due to the volume of information that we have, which is, they're positively correlated. We never had this information. So the fact that we're asking these questions is a good thing.
Understood.
Actually, the information we used to get was just a copy of the previous month's information.
Why are we moving the radios?
So we're just reorganizing the terminal building. So we actually, the front counter that used to live here, we took out to the FBO. And so that's where the AWAS station is moving to, and the radio, and just in an order to in an effort to organize everything and make it more user-friendly out there for the pilots. Stop out and get a candy bar and a soda too. You have to pay for it, of course, but there, at least now we have that service available.
We want to keep the service there. You got to pay for it. All right, committee reports, library board minutes from September 10th. You could ask Mary, or you
No,
could ask
ask Tammy.
who is here. Any questions about the library? Any? I do have I have ICC meeting tomorrow night, and I think the latest update from Mark Liberta is things are proceeding forward with the WCA on our Tri-Troy library situation.
Okay. I have a question. What would be the proposed, what would be the purpose of a thumb drive policy? Are we talking about security? Are we talking about?
Hi. That was actually something that had been recommended by Jim Novy. He's the head of the IT for Prairie Lakes Library System when it was Lake Shores. The directors at the directors meeting had passed that we would not use thumb drives because if any of you were aware, I come out of the school district and Jeremy's nodding his head. Do you know where I'm going with this? I very, very distinctly remember being at work about, 16 years ago, and every day something shut down because we had a student with a thumb drive loading a virus over and over and over again. And so it's just the idea that sometimes it can be malicious, but sometimes it's just accidental. You don't know what's on there, and we don't want it onto our system, which would then go onto all of the libraries. So the directors had passed that, and then Jeff had actually brought it to the board several years ago, but it was never actually incorporated into an official policy. So we just did so.
So will there be a procedure with it, or is this just policy to have no thumb drives? Because, I mean, the way I look at it is, if someone's going to use a thumb drive, it automatically gets formatted before they can use it.
It's been our practice for like 4 years now that patrons can't use a thumb drive.
So they just disable the
right.
USB ports or whatever?
They're not disabled because you need them for things like your mouse and your keyboard, but we don't let them plug them in.
Yeah.
And yes, and generally it hasn't. Nobody usually really. I've never seen somebody go to use it without us knowing about it. And today, with all of the cloud and the file sharing and stuff like that, the need has been reduced greatly, I think. But Mary had actually been going through her old packets and was like, "Hey, what happened to this?" And so
We just thought if that is actually our policy, it should be a policy.
Thank you.
Sure.
Maybe next. What? Yeah. So maybe next time I come over and you're over there, we can just sit down at one of those machines and we can talk about what we control versus what Lakeshore controls on the machine and determine kind of what John's getting at is like, well, we have a piece of paper, but what's the computer configured to do or not do? And so that's just the piece. So because those are the questions I'm always asking here within the Village Hall. And so if we're pursuing other technologies and we have the ability to apply those to your machines or not, like I don't know where that line is about administrative oversight.
Okay.
I think, doesn't the library system completely manage your IT stuff? So the village doesn't manage library IT stuff at all.
No, they don't. Jim Novi and he does all of it. Like I purchase through him. They set up the computer, they bring it in, they install it. We have any problems, they come to us. The one thing that we get from the village is access to financial software and our timesheets. But I mean, like,
Are they on our network?
no,
Okay,
no.
right.
And even like, I remember, was it for this year's budget, Kathy tried to share it with me on Teams, and I couldn't access it at all because we're very distinct. There was, yeah, so. Okay.
John, I'm going to have to do all these questions by myself.
I'll still ask them virtually.
In your head. All right, that was library board minutes, airport advisory committee minutes from 9/9. Anything else about the airport we want to talk about?
Doug's report is more recent than the minute. Doug's report is more recent than the minutes from September. I think the information stands there. They did paint the runway pink, or the symbol on the runway again, for breast cancer awareness this year. That seems to be a regular annual event.
The runway numbers.
The runway numbers. I'm sorry, yes.
That'd be a lot of paint.
And then it rained halfway through. It was a mess.
All right, emergency services district minutes from 9/17. Any questions? Anything, Jason?
Our budget is done.
Any questions for 40 about draft plan commission minutes for 10/14? All right. I will make a motion to adjourn to closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 1985 1C for considering employment, promotions, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercise responsibility. Department heads.
I'll second that.
Roll call vote, please.
President Johnson?
Yes.
Trustee Alexander? Trustee Holm?
Yes.
Trustee Nugent? Yes. Trustee Renucci? Yes.